Welcome to the session for Teachers of Amplify, Texas. And so today we're going to work on and focus on student work analysis. For this session, you're going to need that guided notes. You'll also need student work. You'll need the protocol teacher guide and the formative assessment and level and lessons. Make sure that you have that handy throughout this PD because we're going to be asking you to process for specific questions as we go. And so go ahead and take a minute and identify the outcomes from this session. All right, this is our agenda for today. And as you can see, we're going to explore the Student Work Analysis Protocol Guide, then focus on steps 1 through 3, and then learn more about steps 4 through 5. So let's go ahead and get started. So in this module, you're going to thoroughly review each step of the student work analysis. So to prepare yourself to use this tool, we want you to take 5 minutes and you're going to pause this video and read through the protocol that's linked in your handout. And think about the questions, the guiding questions. How is this protocol similar to the ways that you are already responding to student work? What are some supports for this work that you would like to receive from your coach? Go ahead and pause this video and look at the protocol. All right, so now let's consider the impact of each step. Regular cycles of student work analysis can have a profound impact on students and instruction. So each individual step is a building block towards gains in student outcomes. So let's stamp some of the key ideas when it comes to the impact of the swap. Step 1, understand the task related to text and standards. Again, this step is vital. This allows you to do the student work and really deepen understanding on what are we asking students to know and do. This breaks down the assignment and the skills to really determine where access barriers are occurring. So for example, if you're reading a text, you're skimming through a text and it's historical fiction, what could possibly get in the way? Is it key vocabulary, building background? It also helps teachers to reflect a little bit about their other data points to determine needs. Determine the success criteria for the task. This step creates a concise list of what teachers are looking for when determining the level of mastery on a task. So doing this builds a clear road to providing feedback and determining trends by narrowing the scope of what is being responded to. Step 3, analyze and sort student work. This paints a clear picture of where a class is on the road to mastery. And so by sorting the student work by how thoroughly they're meeting the expectations allows teachers to more easily access what unique strengths and area growths exist at each level. Let's look at steps 4 and 5. To me, steps 4 and 5 are the most important. So after you've sorted into 3 piles, now this is to really provide an opportunity to identify trends across all levels of mastery and spend time examining the larger picture of the student experience. So for example, like teachers and coaches can begin to determine the root causes behind strengths and areas of growth. And step 5, in my mind, the most important step is to determine the action steps for whole group and subgroup. So this is when teachers and coaches will use what they have learned through analysis to create next steps. And by making this lesson and instruction adjustments based on whole class and smaller groups, they're receiving the specific supports they need. So right now in your handout, go ahead and click into the teacher materials, the lesson, and the text. And I want you to examine the task by considering the following questions. What are students being asked to do and understand in this task? So pause this video really fast and go ahead and look at the tasks and the text and the teacher guide and really deepen your understanding of what are students being able asked to do and understand. So for the student task, here is an example of how these questions are asked. So pause the video really fast and read the exemplar responses to deepen your understanding of what an exemplar response would look like. Now we're going to determine the success criteria. So in step 2, teachers and coaches are asked to use what they learned from the task in step 1 to determine a set of criteria. Think about 1 to 3 bullets. And so in creating these success criteria, teachers and coaches will have a clear picture of what it means for a student to be fully, partially, or not met. Go ahead and read the strong success criteria in the circles on the slide. So for this example, we have on the right in the square our 3 success criteria indicators. 1, we want to ensure that we're measuring, recall what I read in chapter 9 of the student reader. Are they referring to the text? 2, answer each question accurately and explain key details with text. So you may notice that students will answer each question accurately, but they lack any kind of details or explanation. And lastly, 3, complete sentences in my answer. Now, success criteria 1 and 2 directly connect to, are students able to comprehend this text? And step 3 is elaboration or more of your language teaks. Now, on the left side, as a team, after you've identified the success criteria, now you're going to determine as a team, what does it mean now to be partially versus not yet meeting? We have to norm on this so that we're speaking the same language when we're collaborating around our analysis and action steps. So take a second and pause the screen and internalize the meeting expectations, the different indicators for the criteria. Now, once the success criteria has been determined and an understanding of fully, partially, and not yet meeting, the next step is really now you're going to sort student work into the 3 categories. And remember, making sure that we are sorting with what we determined is meets, partially, and not yet meets. So we're going to practice now. So in your handout, take out the student work samples from the language you supported and spend about 5 minutes sorting 5 to 6 examples into fully meets, partially meets, and not yet meeting expectations. As you sort, try to keep in mind the specific criteria for fully, partially, and not yet. All right. Now that you have all of your success criteria sorted, your student work sorted based on the success criteria, Now we're going to see this coach do the same thing, and you're going to compare how they sorted and how you sorted. Um, so let's go ahead and take a look.
Now let's look at student work samples. For the sake of this video, we will only be reviewing 3 samples, but you will likely review many more when supporting teachers in this process. Let's start with this sample from student 1. For question 1, the student responded, New Orleans was an important city in 1814 because it was on the Mississippi River and a lot of people traded goods there. Question 2 says, Andrew Jackson led the U.S. Army that was sent to defend New Orleans. Question 3 says, Andrew Jackson disliked the British because they were mean to him when he was their prisoner. The student recalled what was read in Chapter 9 of their student reader, accurately answered each question, and elaborated using key ideas, and finally used complete sentences when answering. I'm going to categorize this sample as fully meeting expectations, since the student met all 3 criteria. Next, we'll look at the sample from student 2. Question 1 says, it was an important big port. Question 2 says, Andrew Jackson, and question 3 says, he disliked the British because they were mean to him. The student recalled what was read in Chapter 9 of their student reader, accurately answered each question and elaborated using key ideas for some questions, and used complete sentences when answering some questions. I'm going to categorize this as partially meeting expectations, because it does accurately fulfill one success criteria and attempts to meet the second and third one, but it definitely does not fully meet them all. Finally, we'll look at this sample from student 3. Question 1 says, New Orleans was an important city because of Mississippi River. Question 2 says, the British, and question 3 says, because it was a war. The student did not recall information from Chapter 9 of their student reader and did not accurately answer each question and elaborate using key ideas. The student did use complete sentences for one question. I'm going to categorize this sample as not yet meeting expectations because it meets less than half of the success criteria.
All right, a quick check for understanding. Go ahead and read the question below. Which of the following student responses would you sort into fully meets? Student 1, 2, or 3? If you answered student 3, you are correct. Now let's take a closer look on steps 4 and 5, in my opinion, the most important.
Step 4, discussion and analysis, is a direct branch off of the work done in Step 3. In this video, you will see how I maintain an asset-based mindset by continuing the line of questioning started in Step 3. What can students do? What can students not yet do? Remember that our bilingual and dual language students' work needs to be analyzed through a holistic approach, considering their strengths in both languages. What can students do in one language to help support what they can't do yet in the partner language? One thing to note, though it will not be present in this video, in your collaborative meetings, you will continue the discussion and analysis past naming strengths and areas of growth to extend to the larger picture of the classroom. Once trends have been identified, you will consider what teacher actions and classroom conditions may have led to specific trends. This will create additional opportunities for the types of data-based, grade-level appropriate adjustments that we will discuss in Step 5. All right, let's begin our initial analysis. We are going to start by looking at these samples that are fully meeting expectations. It may seem obvious to determine their strengths and counterintuitive to look for areas of growth, but we want to make sure that we are specific about what is going well so that we can build on those strengths, and even students who are fully meeting expectations still have plenty of room to grow, and we want to make sure that we are pushing them to hone their skills. Additionally, with all of these samples, we want to be sure that we are using an asset-based mindset. In other words, we want to start by looking at what our students can do before we identify what they cannot yet do. So, what can these students do? Looking at these examples, immediately I noticed that these students are recalling the information from the student reader to accurately answer the questions. Another strength I see right away is that they both use complete sentences. As for what they cannot yet do, or rather areas where they still have room to grow, these students could work on adding more details to their answers. Additionally, I'm noticing minor grammatical errors, like writing dislike instead of disliked. So I'll put that as an area of growth as well. Now we'll move on to the partially meeting examples. Again, I'm using an asset-based mindset, so I begin by asking, what can these students do? Well, similar to the fully meeting expectation samples, these students have both done a great job of recalling what was read in the student reader. Additionally, they each used complete sentences for some of the questions. When thinking about what they cannot yet do, I notice the students do not accurately answer each question and elaborate using key ideas. The students also do not always use complete sentences. Lastly, we come to the samples that are not yet meeting expectations. Before we dive in, I just want to name that sometimes with samples like these, it can be challenging to maintain an asset-based mindset. It can sometimes feel like there is very little these students can do, but it is important to remember that students learn when they can. In other words, they have the resources and supports that allow them to access the high-quality instructional materials. They are still in your class, working hard and trying their best, even when it may not seem that way. And it is up to us as educators to ensure that we are providing the supports that will allow them to better access grade level tasks. It is almost more important with this group than the others to maintain that asset-based mindset, because these are the students that will require the most support and encouragement and will also likely need the most uplifting. With that in mind, let's look at these samples. When I ask myself what these two students can do, I see right away that they both are using complete sentences for some answers. I also notice they are answering all questions, and most, if not all, words are spelled correctly. When I think about what they cannot yet do, both students did not accurately recall information from the reader to answer the questions correctly. This is definitely a place where I can help them grow.
All right. So now I want you to consider the video you just watched and how the Amplify Texas program is in it. This coach, used an asset based mindset to determine the trends. Using what you observed and your reflections on it, respond to the following prompt. All right, let's move on to the final step. In this step, teachers and coaches will use the data they've gathered and trends they've observed to create an action plan that targets specific adjustments to upcoming instruction. Let's watch a video discussing how to do this. As you watch, I really want you to reflect on the following question. How can you leverage the unit, domain, and lesson internalization protocols to create strong action steps?
Finally, we come to step 5. Here, we will be taking all of the work and analysis that we have done on activity book page 23.1 and use it to create an action plan for our students that is data-driven, grade level appropriate, and moves our students forward without remediation. We'll start by looking at what makes an action step effective and what makes for a less effective action step. Effective action steps are based on the trends and data found during student work analysis. They are grounded in the existing high-quality instructional materials, are grade level appropriate, do not include whole class reteaches of the same lesson, are aimed at the specific needs of a variety of students, and are supported by unit or domain and lesson internalization. Less effective action steps are not based in data. They make use of outside materials or sources. They remediate skills from previous grades. They attempt to be a one-size-fits-all solution, and they do not utilize the unit, domain, or lesson internalization protocols. Now we'll use the trends we identified in the previous video to determine the action step that we will take. Pause this video and take a moment to reread the trends to yourself. As I'm looking at these trends, I'm noticing across the board there is strength in terms of using complete sentences for at least some questions. While I know that my students who are not yet meeting expectations struggled with accurately answering the questions, they at the very least are acknowledging the prompt and its language. This is a strength that I'm going to want to build on in a way that recognizes where they are already succeeding, but also allowing me to address the needs of the students who still have room to grow within this strength. One area of growth I noticed was that most samples had some minor grammatical and spelling errors. It may be tempting to try and do a whole mini lesson on this, but it would not be the best use of my time since the focus of this formative assessment was evaluating details read to determine key ideas. While I want to address it, it's not something that I'm going to do a whole reteach of. Instead, I will find a way to give it a quick hit and give feedback as I circulate and see it in the moment. Something else I've noticed is that all students are struggling with accurately answering each question and elaborating using key ideas, especially for those who fully met expectations. While all three groups were at very different levels with this, it was something that they all had room to grow in. When I start thinking about how to lift up the strength of responding to a prompt while giving additional support for answering the question accurately and elaborating using key ideas, I realize that I need to find a similar prompt in a future lesson and do a whole class analysis before students begin to respond. Before we write out the full plan for adjusting our lesson to support the actions that we determined, we want to make sure that we are utilizing our internalization protocols, both the unit and domain and lesson. Here you'll see some questions to consider. You can use your notes from your unit or domain internalization to determine where in the unit or domain you will see this concept or skill again. You can use the lesson internalization protocol for an upcoming lesson to determine what adjustments you'll need to make within the lesson, especially around pacing. Do you need to add additional time for this activity? Will you need to shorten other activities to make that time? And then finally, how will you reassess this skill in order to see the impact of your action step? Now that we've used our internalization protocols to determine when we will implement this action step, it's time to write out a specific step-by-step plan for adjusting that lesson. We also want to keep a reminder of the trends that we are addressing as we create this plan. So my action step was prompt analysis on a future response task. So right away, I want to list the lesson that I'll be doing this in, which is Unit 6, Lesson 31, Activity Book page 31.1. Take notes on our national anthem. First, I want to name that our students are already doing well overall in answering each question and attempting to use complete sentences. I know that this is happening at different levels for different students, but that will be addressed separately. I'll have the students read each question out loud and then ask them to do a turn and talk about what else they will need to include in their responses. I will use their responses to create a list on the board of success criteria for each question that they can refer to while they write their responses. Once I send students into independent practice, I'll circulate immediately to my students who are not yet meeting expectations and make sure they are accurately answering each question and elaborating using key ideas. Once I've worked with them, I'll begin circulating to students who are partially and then fully meeting expectations in order to address their ability to elaborate using key details to accurately answer each question.
So As we've mentioned, all action steps you determine using the SWOT should be based on student data and supports learning acceleration. So let's review some of the examples and non-examples of action steps based on the work we've done today. Prompt analysis on a future exam response task. So completing a prompt analysis with students will help them determine what makes a full and accurate response, which was an area of growth identified in the work samples. Vocabulary mini lesson. While students used content-specific vocabulary in the responses, this was not the focus of the formative assessment and would not be appropriate action step. So small group instruction on locating information in student reader to answer questions would benefit for students who are not yet meeting expectations. In an upcoming lesson, the teacher could provide small group instruction using similar tasks and allow students to practice recalling information. Whole class review of capitalization and punctuation. While there were some errors in capitalization punctuation, it would still not make sense to do a full class review since it's not seen in every response and was not the focus of the formative assessment. So let's complete another CFU. Read the statement and describe which one most captures the impact of using the student work analysis protocol. If you chose 1, 4, and 5, you are rocking. So now it is time to head to our closing. If you have any specific questions, please reach out to the Bloom leadership team or myself to support you thinking through that. So now we are going to take our quiz. So in your handout, you have a link that says teacher quiz. And you're going to fill out your first and last name, your role, and then when you identify the organization, you're going to scroll all the way down to Achievement Network. And again, answer these questions carefully. Do not forget to put your name and find Bloom in here as well. Again, all of these PDs are through the Strong Foundation Implementation Grant and requires everyone to take an exit ticket to show that they have attended the PD. All right, you all have a wonderful day. And again, if you have any questions, please reach out to the leadership team here at Bloom or myself, Callie Gonzalez, and I will be here to support you.